All right, we're back. We're still talking about the president's management agenda that dropped earlier today. Now we're joined with Tony Scott, the former federal CIO and currently the senior advisor for cybersecurity and privacy at Squire, Patton and Boggs. I get that right, Tony?
That's right.
All
Yes.
right. So you got a chance to read through the management agenda that dropped this morning?
Yes, I did.
So, did you see anything in there that really jumped out to you as new, different? It was a very tech-heavy management agenda.
Sure.
Was there anything in there that jumped out at you as something game-changing?
Well, I think not so much game changing in terms of what's proposed, but certainly the emphasis on it at the top of the PMA agenda, I think is significant and I think is a really good thing. It, I think, represents the seriousness of this challenge. And as you've probably heard me say many times, I think this is one of the biggest crises since Y2K, only there's just no deadline. It keeps happening every single day. So,
Are you talking about the overall modernization crises, the
yeah.
workforce crises? Which aspect of this do you think is the
Well, it's the whole modernization thing. I mean, the reality is we're falling further and further behind every day. We don't go fix this, and there's a point at which it becomes irreparable. And I'm not sure we're there yet, but we're, inching closer to it every single day.
Yeah. What I thought was interesting, so often we talk about IT modernization these days. Back when you were the federal CIO, federal IT modernization became a buzzword, and we're still harping on it quite a bit. What I thought was interesting here is this is really about modernizing the workforce, modernizing management practices using technology. When you look at it from that direction, how do things change?
Well, I think it becomes there's a significant difference. One is we could choose, and I think this is the wrong choice, to just go in and upgrade hardware, and upgrade networks a little bit and leave the existing business processes and, practices and so on in place. And so when I talk about modernization, I'm really talking about going one step further, which is digitizing the way government works to take advantage of what we now know can be done with this awesome technology that we have. And so it's a mobile social world. It's a AI-driven world. It's a video-driven world. And that's very different than the way a lot of these systems were built 10, 20, 40 years ago, that was keyboard and text oriented and very siloed in its approach. So when I talk about modernization, it's really not just, replacing one for one, but really reimagining the way, some of these things work.
And that actually it's interesting because that also highlights one of the things I saw there that was really stood out as probably the newest thing to my eye that we hadn't seen before this was released, which is the federal data strategy. Did you get a chance to see that? I think it was the page around page 17. It really I thought it was interesting that data was such a pillar of this whole program. As they develop that strategy from your time in government, what should be included in a federal data strategy? What should that look like?
Well, I think there's a couple elements of it in my mind. I mean, during the Obama administration, we were focused on making government data available to the public and to citizens and others for reuse and so on. But that's just one piece. I think probably a more important piece is government using the data it has and sharing it in a way that's beneficial to citizens. So right now, as you, I'm sure, know, government data is very, very siloed. There's copies of literally the same information practically everywhere. And that's just not citizen serving at the end of the day. I was talking with a lot of people towards the end of the administration. Maybe we should have and this would require an act of law, but a citizen's right to know what data the government has on you or about you, absent, criminal investigations and some obvious carve-outs. And the notion behind that was citizens should have the ability to know what data the government has, but also to correct it if it's wrong.
And
And
with the way that
would have forced, what that would have forced is every federal agency to get a handle on what data it has and make an API available so that citizens could access it in a sort of a uniform way. And so I was thinking about, how do you clean up the mess that we have now? And I think, part of what I see in this set of actions is aimed at, more, let's say, good use of data for citizens' benefit.
I was going to say, looking at what the administration said, particularly around patient data, health data,
yes.
It sounds like that's definitely something they would be interested in pursuing.
Sure.
There's
last thing, tons of examples of this, and it's not just government that has this problem, by the way. So I don't think there's any large institution that I know of that doesn't have some form of the same problem.
Yeah. One more thing I wanted to run by you from today's release. A lot of what was in there outside of this data strategy wasn't necessarily new stuff. Again, IT modernization, workforce issues, new acquisition strategies. All of these things have been talked about before. And in fact, during the rollout this morning, Margaret Weichert, the deputy director for management at OMB, acknowledged it. She said, a lot of this stuff isn't new. What's new here, she said, is that we're going to get her done. I spoke with Margaret right after that, and she explained that what she means by that is that they're asking questions that in the past people have been a bit afraid to ask, and it's leading them down rabbit holes. Nothing is off limits here, right? They're willing to look at everything. As someone who has asked some of these questions before, has tried to push some of these efforts, what roadblocks do you think that they're going to run into that they're not seeing just yet?
Well, I think, there'll be any number of roadblocks. Some things that you want to do, require legislation to do. Some can be done by executive order. Some can be done by just leadership generally, and so on. So I applaud the efforts. There's just no mistaking it. It requires big ideas and bold action to get some of these things going. But, there's also a learning curve that everybody goes through in government, as I did. And some of the things that you really want to get done, take a little more effort than just wishing it so or coming up with the big idea. So I've talked to Margaret and Suzette both about, great, have the big idea, but also have an implementation plan. And I see them making good progress on that. So I applaud the effort. I'm fond of saying everything's been learned, just not by everybody all the time. And this is probably some case of that, and some case of, out of the box thinking that I think, frankly, is needed. So.
Excellent. Before we let you go, Tony, what's from today's PMA release? What's the big takeaway for you?
Well, I'm just really pleased to see momentum on a bunch of things that I think are really important. I'm rooting them on and cheering for the efforts, and I think everybody deserves our support in terms of trying to really get this going in a meaningful way, and starting with Congress showing us the money for MGT. It's
that's not going to be that $3.1 billion you wanted, but
well, it's not quite. But hey, anything's a good start as long as it's got a couple of millions in the number, and that's what it's going to take. So, let's.
We're supposed to be seeing money. Yeah, we're supposed to be seeing an appropriations bill maybe by this evening, so we might have an answer to that sooner than later.
That's right.
Tony, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.